Morning Talk on SAFM.
10 minutes past 9 here on SAFM 104 to 107, paying tribute this morning to Archbishop Denis Hurley. So we'd like to hear from you if you know of him or you knew him personally and you'd like to share a memory or two with us. The number to dial is 0891104207. SMSs to 34701. My guests are joining us in our studios in Durban, Dr. Paddy Kearney, who is a coordinator of the Denis Hurley Centre in Durban and also biographer of Archbishop Hurley. I read quite a bit about the Archbishop from the book written by Dr. Kearney, and the book is called Truth to Power. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Also in our Durban studios, we have Bishop Reuben Phillip, who is the Anglican Bishop of Natal and also a patron of the Denis Hurley Centre. On the line, we have Dr. May Mkhize, trustee of the Denis Hurley Centre, and we also have a plethora of other people we're going to be calling throughout the hour who knew him, who were family, who've worked with him, and they're going to share their experiences and memories with us as well this morning. So let's make it a warm one, and I'll take your calls in a moment. Let me say good morning to my guest. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Siki.
Let me start with you, Dr. Kearney. It's quite serendipitous, I think, that today would have been his 97th birthday, and we're talking about him.
Yes, it's a wonderful occasion to be remembering him.
Let's talk a little bit about the book that you wrote about him. I mentioned Truth to Power. It's quite a moving book. It's a treat to read. The process that it took, because there were quite a number of people, it's a number of years that you were covering in the book. What process did you go through?
Well, I had actually been collecting items about Archbishop Hurley over a number of years, perhaps going back 20 years, but the intensive writing and research took place over the last 5 or 6 years. And of course this new book, Truth to Power, is an abridged version of the full biography, which was entitled Guardian of the Light. And you mentioned that at the start of the book and in the preface as well. So if one wants a more comprehensive look at his life and his times, that's the one to read. But this one is quite handy for some of us who are lazy readers. So tell us a little bit about his early years. I mean, a lot shaped him and how it shaped him to become the man that he did become, and also the Archbishop that he would later become. Well, his father was a lighthouse keeper, and that seems to have been a big influence in his life. When he was born, his father was at Cape Point Lighthouse, and subsequently the family moved to Robben Island. And Denis Hurley, young Denis Hurley, had some of his primary schooling there. They subsequently moved on to several other lighthouses, and he spent some of his high school years in Newcastle and subsequently in Pietermaritzburg. And during that time he had a very painful experience because he and several other boys were lost in a cave for nearly a day. And it seems that during that time he made a promise that if they got out, he would become a priest.
And what other influences were there that took him in the direction of the church? His mother was quite religious as well.
His mother was very religious, both parents Irish, and the mother was the kind of leader of the prayers in the home, and I think that might have given Archbishop Hurley the idea that it wouldn't be the end of the world if women were allowed to become priests.
Yeah. Which was quite controversial at the time. It doesn't sound so
Still
much
controversial in the Catholic Church.
Yes, absolutely. Let's bring Bishop Phillip into this conversation, because I also want to talk about the value that his parents and he himself placed in education, and that obviously played a major role in the interest that he took and the work that he took in trying to keep Catholic schools open in South Africa when the threat of the subsidies being taken away by the government during the introduction of a separate education, Bishop, for black people in South Africa.
Well, you know, many of the so-called mainline churches have, for most of their existence in this country, has been very involved in education and providing opportunities, as you rightly suggest, for youngsters, but particularly those who didn't have access to proper government education. And certainly the Catholic Church is one of the forerunners in this. And therefore we shouldn't be surprised that the Catholic Church produce some of outstanding leaders, people who are leaders not only in the Church but in society in general. And of course that still happens. There are very many Catholic schools dotted around the country, and as you rightly suggest, Archbishop Hurley was one of the driving forces in that, and we're very grateful that he gave that kind of leadership, and particularly at a time when our education system seems to be in a bit of a crisis, to put it mildly.
When was the first time you met him, Bishop?
Giving away my age. I would say about 30, 40 years ago. I've always been a son of KwaZulu-Natal, and he had spent most, if not all, of his priestly and episcopal ministry in this place. And I've often said that he's been one of the most influential people in my life, although I'm Anglican. He inspired me, not only in my priestly ministry, but also in committing myself even more deeply to matters of peace and justice. It's not just the things he said, those were important and we remember them, but just his action.
Yeah.
I remember, for example, on Good Fridays, when those of us in the city of Durban would march through the streets, the start in the days of apartheid, carrying crosses to protest against the policies of apartheid, and often he would be in the front of that procession. And I always remember him with his head down and carrying a cross, but it was more than just carrying a cross on his shoulder. You had the sense that he was carrying that cross in his heart, feeling deeply, deeply burdened for what was going on in the country. That was during apartheid, and I think some of that continued post-apartheid.
And Dr. Kearney, just picking up on what the Bishop is saying, he spent a lot of time reflecting. I mean, he'd reflect quite carefully on what needed to be done and what the Church needed to say, and then he would stick to his guns, so to speak, after that.
Yes, he was a person who wanted to be thoroughly convinced that the course of action he was going to take was the right one. But as you say, once he had made that decision, it would be almost impossible to move him from it.
What impact do you think he had on the Catholic Church? I've got an SMS here from Lyndall who says, did Bishop Hurley ever speak power to the Pope?
Well, he did indeed.
Yeah.
He wrote a series of letters to Pope Paul VI at about the time that the Humanae Vitae encyclical was proclaimed, which banned the use of artificial contraception for Catholics. And he was, in a way, pleading with the Pope to have a very good look at that issue. I don't think, well, he clearly didn't persuade the Pope, but it was very interesting that he undertook that quite a lengthy correspondence, and the Pope, from his replies, you could see was taking him very seriously.
How was he viewed by other Catholic bishops at the time? He did, of course, study in Rome, spent a number of years there just before the outbreak of World War II.
Yes. Well, you know, he was a very influential bishop at the time of the Second Vatican Council. He was one of the 101 bishops who were on the preparatory commission for that council, and he spoke a number of times in the plenary sessions in St. Peter's Basilica. And from what I hear, he was always listened to very attentively. And one of the marks of how influential he was that the Notre Dame press of Notre Dame University in the United States published a series of 25 books entitled Men Who Make the Council. And Hurley was one of those 25. And that's out of 2,500 bishops who were at the council.
Let me bring Dr. May Mkhize into this conversation before she thinks I've forgotten about her. Dr. Mkhize, thank you very much for your time this morning. In what ways do you think we should be celebrating the life and the impact and the influence of the Archbishop?
In my way of thinking of it, having grown up at the medical school, close to the Devon and working with him in areas like Diaconia and St. Anthony's, and looking at him, he was really an inspiration to all of us. And he gave us the courage to continue and gave us the hope that we actually need to carry on. So I think in celebrating his life, as I get involved in the Denis Hurley Center, I look at the pillars that we will be focusing at: education, training, building communities. And I think to carry his legacy, it is upon us to actually get involved as members of the community and make sure that we actually make a difference where we can in the education and training of our children, but also in community building, because we realize that after democracy, so much has happened, so many people live together, but also lots of our people are still in poverty. And I think in building communities, we need to remember that he was very much for the dignity of people. And I think when we do that, we need to do that in a sense that says to the people, do something, and the communities need to be partners in their own community building. So that's what actually I felt it was a very tall order to be asked to be part of the trustees of the Denis Hurley Center. But I also thought, well, I have seen the man and I've always been inspired by him. The little that I can do is to get involved, make sure it succeeds, and make sure that the programs that we do in the center do carry on what he's always wanted to see happening within communities.
I want you, in a moment, to give us some examples of the type of encouragement that he gave you and gave other South Africans during really probably the most difficult time in the history of our country. So I'll give you a moment to think about that. And we're also going to be speaking to a number of other people who knew the bishop. We'll do that in a moment. You can call in as well. The number 0891104207, SMSs to 34701.
Morning Talk on SAFM.
It's 25 minutes past 9 here on SAFM 104 to 107. Remembering Archbishop Denis Hurley this morning, you can join in our conversation on 0891104207, SMSs to 34701. My guest, Dr. Paddy Kearney, who's a coordinator of the Denis Hurley Center in Durban and also a biographer of Archbishop Hurley. Bishop Reuben Phillip is Anglican Bishop of Natal and also patron of the Denis Hurley Center, and Dr. May Mkhize is a trustee of the center. Before I take the calls, Dr. Mkhize, I wanted to hear from you the types, it's just some examples of the types of encouragement that you were able to draw from him.
You know, the apartheid regime was very ruthless. And if you were to challenge them, you knew that you could stand a chance of being in jail or to be arrested. But he was a man of God who stood against apartheid and the then government injustices. And as medical students at the University of Natal, the so-called black section, we were quite in partnership with working with his area, like the Diaconia, as I said. So in mobilizing students and meeting and protesting, when the man of God was there, you saw that this was the right thing to do. I mean, we were involved in actually, there was a time in 1981 when there was going to be a protest action against celebrating the formation of the Republic of South Africa. He was in the forefront of that. I remember also when there were worker problems, like the ones that were there in Howick. He was there, and the meetings that were held with the union members. You know, when we found him there and him at the top of the leadership, then you realize that definitely you can't be on the wrong path. So whether arrest was imminent or not, we worked very closely with the man, and he was in the leadership role. So I think he gave us the courage to continue and the strength to know that what we're doing is actually correct. And despite the consequences, it didn't really matter.
Let's hear from Fred in Port Elizabeth. Hi, Fred.
Just close the door, Molly. I've got a private call.
Hi, Fred.
Hello,
Hi.
Vicky, how are you?
I'm well, thank you.
So nice to hear your voice. You know, I was so tired, and when I heard your voice and the topic, I thought, I must call Ziggy. This is only the second time that I've made a call on this number, you know.
Oh, thanks for calling, Fred.
Yeah.
Did you know the Archbishop?
The very fact that you have Anglican gentlemen there discussing this very, very iconic gentleman in the Catholic hierarchy is significant, because that was Denis Hurley. And Ziggy, how the time flies, you won't believe it. 52 years ago, I used to walk to church at the Emmanuel Cathedral, which is one of the most beautiful churches in South Africa, and had the honor of learning catechism, etc., from Archbishop Denis Hurley, you know. And top of my Christmas list is the book that my brother in Christ mentioned, The Guardian of the Light. That is the true title according to the Southern Cross. I may just mention that I am Catholic, Ziggy.
Yes.
And I've had the honor and great privilege of worshipping at 3 mother churches.
Oh.
St. Mary's, where I was born in Cape Town.
Yeah.
Now, currently, St. Augustine's in Port Elizabeth, which has one of the greatest parishes ever. And a second only possibly to Durban, you know. And then, of course, where else did I worship? Currently, I said Port Elizabeth.
Yeah.
So it's Cape Town, PE, and Durban.
And Durban. Wow.
Yeah. Now, Ziggy, this is a very, very interesting topic, because Archbishop Hurley was close to. I was also Irish educated at St. Columba's Christian Brothers College in Cape Town, which was the school, you know, of the time. It's closed now, but the institution where they trained the priests, St. Francis Xavier, still exists. It is a matter of deep regret that that school doesn't exist, because it has produced people like Brian O'Connell, who is currently the rector of the University of the Western Cape. I was one of the dumb guys, though, you know.
Don't say that, Fred. Don't say that. But thanks for your call, and thanks for sharing. Oh, sorry, Fred. That was my fault. I didn't mean to cut him off. But Bishop, before I take other callers and go to headlines, it's important what he said about the fact that we're talking to you, an Anglican, about a Catholic Archbishop. And there's an SMS here that says, Denis Hurley had a great relationship with the Muslim community and Muslim anti-apartheid activists, and he set an example for mutual cooperation for common good. Bishop?
Huh?
Oh, sorry, I missed you there.
All right. Now, I was saying there's no question about that. He was one of the greatest ecumenical leaders the country has known. Here in Durban, he worked along peoples of all faiths as the person SMS'd in, Muslims or Hindus. And it wasn't just a sort of fleeting relationship. It was meaningful, it was deep, it was around issues of justice and peace, but also just plain building relationships. That's the kind of man he was. And also ecumenically, he worked in the Council of Churches, and in fact was instrumental in forming what is now called the Diaconia Council of Churches, which has played a critical role under the apartheid regime and even now in matters of transformation. But I just wanted to add that, you know, at a time when I think a lot of us are feeling somewhat cynical about leadership in general in the country and in business and so on, here was somebody who was a visionary, he was prophetic, but he was also a very humble man. You know, he was able to mix with all of us, with the child, with the ordinary person on the street. And I think it's that kind of legacy that will be an enduring one to people like me and many others. Just an outstanding, a wonderful, charismatic and caring leader.
Fantastic. All right, we're going to go to Taming Lasana in a moment. John in Bloemfontein and Ella Gandhi, of course, as well. Taming Lasana is consultant to the National Heritage Council, and he was someone who was helped by Archbishop Hurley. So we're going to talk to him in a moment, and we'll take more calls and share more stories, share a lot about this iconic man. It's 24 minutes to 10, paying tribute this morning to Archbishop Denis Hurley. Let's chat to Taming Lasana, who's on the line. He's a consultant to the National Heritage Council. And I understand that you were someone who was helped by the Archbishop when you were an angry young man.
Yeah, that's it. I was 17 years when I dropped out of school. Like many youth of my time in the mid-70s who could not be accommodated in Bantu education schools, angry because of the injustices. So the bishop, our story is a living testimony of his engagement on issues of social justice and reconciliation. Very angry. We went to him and said, "Young man, talk to me. Who are you? Why are you not at school? Where were you?" I said, "I was at St. Augustine's High School at Tumutu." I said, "Do you know who that man is, Auguste? He was a black man, one of the greatest thinkers of all time. I want you to like him." He gave us the church hall. We mobilized ourselves. We formed a learning support, self-support groups. But more than anything, he gave us the philosophy of learning that still shapes my life. See, judge, act.
Yeah.
Is that you will be like St. Augustine of Hippo if you go around life with the simple three principles: see, judge, act. He helped us get Gandhi Library for our day usage, and by afternoon, evening time, we would actually receive our lessons from the people like the now Minister of Finance, Gordon Praveen. He was a pharmacist at that time, and he would help us organize on our own selves winter schools, summer schools. Winter schools was always about us young people helping each other with our curricular work. Summer school, it was about all the creatives, the art, the expression, venting out our anger in terms of expression, poetry, art, and cloth printing. I'm saying that philosophy of see, judge, act, and the great stories about his experience at Vatican II are still inspiring me up to this date.
All right. Thanks, Tammy. Thanks for sharing that. And before I go to John in Bloemfontein, very quickly, Dr. Kearney, I've forgotten now. Just remind me where that principle, the see, judge, act principle came from.
It comes from a group called the Young Christian Workers.
Yes.
And Archbishop Hurley first came across them when he was studying in Rome. And it was a subject of much discussion amongst the seminarians. They were very excited about that. And when he came back to South Africa, he would have dearly liked to be a full-time chaplain to the Young Christian Workers, because he thought that was a simple method, but a very powerful method.
Let's hear from John in Bloemfontein. Hi, John.
Good morning, Siki. Thank you for a wonderful program.
Thank you.
Archbishop Hurley was a very humble man, but he had an aura around him, and he would come to us. I'm a son of a sugar farmer at Maidstone on the north coast of Natal, or KwaZulu-Natal, and he would come to us on a Sunday and share his Sunday meal with us and a good glass of wine, and he always good for a laugh. But the more important thing to remember about Archbishop Hurley is that he left a legacy of a school which many people might not know about, called Thomas More. And I was fortunate enough to go there. His brother Chris, who immigrated, was the principal after a chap called Robin Savory. But it was a Catholic school, and it's now non-denominational. When I was there, it was 186 young people, young men, and it's now over 1,000. And it goes from grade R right up to matric, or grade 12. But it's that's a legacy that many people might not remember and will know about, and it's something that we can certainly attribute to Archbishop Denis Hurley, who was one of the founding fathers of that school.
Fantastic.
A great school.
Thanks, John.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Thanks for your call. Bye-bye. Sipiwe in Hillcrest. Hi, Sipiwe.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Yes, I would like also to talk about Arch, because I know him. I worked for him, actually.
Oh.
Before I worked for him, also, he confirmed me. I'm a Catholic. I worked for the Archdiocese of Durban in the late 90s. But mainly I was working on his Archbishop Development Fund. That was a fund which he started to help people who were in desperate situations, but also people who were involved in development in their areas. These could be the people like the Clare Estate, people in Hillcrest, people in wherever who needed some help. But also what I know for him, which also I also had a stint in his, he was also trying to, during the land issues, he formed something which was called Catholic Rural Transformation, which was helping the Catholic parishes and especially the bishops who owned a lot of land to turn back the land to the people, as you know the issue of the land, how the land was by the missionaries.
Thank you so much, Sipiwe, for sharing that. And Dr. Mkhize, he underscores what you were saying a little bit earlier about that drive that he had to help those who needed help.
Yes, he really does. And what I'm thinking is, in his help, and I'm getting excited as a trustee that it sounded like a dream that we can actually build the Denis Hurley Center, but I can see it becoming reality. And I'm thinking about just now you were interviewing the angry young 17-year-old man.
Yes.
I think as South Africans, we are a very angry nation.
Yeah.
And if we can take our anger and direct that to situations like we've just understood him saying, he was directed to open a library, directed to form support groups, directed to form classes. I'm just looking at everything that we need now. Not one person can actually solve the problem that we are faced with. Firstly, we need to address our own anger and say, yes, as a country, we are very angry. But are we going to continue to get angry and destroy ourselves? Here is this guardian of the light. He's trying to prevent us from self-destruction. I think we can learn from it. And as the center is built, I think we can all take courage from the fact that a man of humility did live among us. And these are the things that he wanted us to do. And as a country as a whole, those are the few things that we can do in our different communities to make sure that we uphold his legacy.
Absolutely. Right, I'm going to take the call from Monsignor Paul Nadal in a moment, and we'll take more. And there's lots of SMSs, so I have to read them. We'll do that in a moment.
Morning Talk on SAFM.
I'm going to read some of your SMSs on the Archbishop Denis Hurley. We're paying tribute to him this morning. Someone says the Catholic Church gave up lots of their schools at a time when they could have played a pivotal role in education. What was the reason for this? And that's from ML. I'll find out. I'll get a proper explanation from Dr. Kearney in a moment on that one. Alan in Cape Town says, great tribute. When it comes to a Hurley-Burley, one could rely on the Burley-Hurley. Author, he was a big man indeed. Zake Ngumalo in Peter Maritzburg says, I was confirmed in 1966 at St. Augustine's Catholic Church in Peter Maritzburg by Bishop Hurley when I was 10 years old. And Jenny says, the late Archbishop once told me that had he not become a priest, he would have been a political prisoner. Rest in peace, Arch. Mike in Durban says, I understand Hurley stood for the ecumenical movement. I think I'm pronouncing that right, I hope. And he says, who in the Roman Catholic Church is continuing that? We'll talk about that. And another one says, Paddy Kearney was a potent force in the movement to support COs, as was the Archbishop. We owe them big time. And Brian Kumalo in Peter Maritzburg says, if the late bishop left such a person like Umamume Mkhize behind, indeed he left a big legacy. I am a Catholic also. And Subri Govender says, hi Siki and Bishop Philip and Paddy. Archbishop Hurley was a great freedom fighter in his own way. I remember him at an anti-apartheid protest meeting where in his humble way, he would condemn racism and urge us to fight on. I sincerely hope some of our current leaders would learn from his commitment, his morals, his values, his principles. Thanks for the tribute. So we'll read more. Let's speak now, I think, to the Monsignor Paul Nadal. And you knew the late Archbishop very well, Monsignor. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning to you, and thank you for your program. Yes, I knew him very well indeed. Our relationship started when I was 10 years old.
Oh.
No, 8 years old,
8 years
actually,
old.
because he gave me my first communion. He was chaplain to the school that I attended, St. Henry's in Durban, Morris Brothers. And so we had a long-standing relationship. He sent me to the seminary in 1954. He ordained me a priest in 1959. And then I worked with him at the Bishops' Conference level when he was president. I worked as one of the secretaries of the Catechetical Commission. And then I became his Vicar General in 1983, his last Vicar General. So we had a long-standing relationship, but a great, great man. Bishop Reuben has said he was a visionary and a prophet. I'd like to add that he was also a strategist. He was a man who could plan things. He could read the signs of the times. In the church in South Africa, someone compared him once to what Nelson Mandela was to South Africa and the world. He was to the church in South Africa and to the church worldwide, to the Catholic Church worldwide.
Oh, and from what I'm hearing from you, he played a huge role in your career. What impact do you think he had on other young priests in South Africa in the Catholic Church?
Well, I think, many of my generation, I said I met him when I was 8. I am now 80. So he influenced that whole generation of priests working in Natal particularly. We all looked up to him. We all admired him. And he influenced us in his dedication. He never, ever demanded of others of what he gave of himself. And that's quite a remarkable gift.
Thanks for talking to us this morning, Monsignor.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing
calling
your story.
me.
It's a pleasure.
Yes.
Bye. Let's hear from Elizabeth Mkame. Elizabeth, you are also somebody who was a long-time staff member at Diaconia that Bishop Philip mentioned a little bit earlier. Morning to you.
Good morning, Vicky.
And just share with us your memories of the Archbishop.
Thank you so much for calling. I've known Archbishop Hurley way back when I was young, when he confirmed me. That time he was still a very young bishop. You remember, he was a very young bishop when, and I have always admired him, especially for being concerned about the welfare of people in the Greater Durban area. The mere fact that he was able to establish Diaconal Council of Churches. And then also I remember him very well for his concern about the deaf children, hearing impaired children. I have one who is also hearing impaired, who managed to study in America. He established a school at Injanga, which is called Watindwa, a school for the hearing impaired. And he was also very much concerned about women's issues. I remember he shared so much with the Catholic Women's League. I'm also a member for the past 43 years.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. Bishop Philip, let's talk a bit about, the impact of the Diaconal Council of Churches, because it came into formal existence in 1976, but just ahead of those events in June of 1976. And I think the Monsignor said something very important about the fact that the Archbishop could read the signs of the times.
Well, he certainly could do that, and more than reading the signs of the times, he was able to encourage, even galvanize the church to address the great and evil issues of apartheid, which is the reason that led to the formation of the Diaconia Council of Churches. And Paddy Carney, who's with us here, was its first director, so he can speak more eloquently about the Council of Churches. But the Council of Churches, you always know, and you knew in the days of apartheid, something was really effective when the police attacked it, discredited, and all of those things. And so it wasn't unusual when, on occasions, the building which housed the Diaconia was surrounded by the police or was raided and all of those things. So it was a very effective instrument, and I think a pivotal movement, certainly here in Durban and KZN, that brought about and contributed greatly to justice and transformation.
And Dr. Kearney, do you want to just add to that?
Well, for me, it was a great learning experience. I think I was a very naive young 31-year-old, the age at which Archbishop Hurley became bishop, when I became the director of Diaconia, and working together with other people, working together with church leaders and staff, and of course people from the communities who were bringing problems to our attention, we gradually evolved strong methods of responding and helping the church to use its immense resources to help people and to bring about social change. That was always the thing that struck me, that the church was extremely powerful but hardly knew how much power it enjoyed. And I think Diaconia tried, in our humble way, to help the churches realize that power, that they could be influential, and they can still be very influential, and they need to be.
Let's hear from Rose in Durban. Hi, Rose.
Hi, Siki.
Hi.
It's so nice to be speaking to you, and such a wonderful topic, and such lovely people on the radio today, and such a beautiful man they're talking about.
And thanks for talking. In fact, it probably would, if it hadn't been for you, we probably would have not been doing this today. So I have to thank you.
Well, I want to thank you, Siki, a huge amount, and I want to thank Paddy Carney as well, because he is like a soldier in battle getting this Archbishop Hurley Centre built. I can tell you, there is no man working harder than he is, and more diligently and more determinedly to get it done. But to the Archbishop, two things I wanted to say. You know, believe it or not, I grew up in a home, and probably most of us white South Africans did, because we were so jolly ignorant at the time, where my father was an ardent nationalist, and we were literally brainwashed, you know, into believing stuff. And one of the things that we were brainwashed into believing was that the Archbishop was a communist. You know, it seems incredible at the time, but the government was labeling him that, and the police were labeling him that, and us white people just believed it. And, you know, he not only carried the burden of a country that was really, really battling and struggling, but he carried the burden of his white parishioners also being up against him in what he was doing. And I think that must have been a very painful journey for him. But all of that notwithstanding, I got into a predicament, and I just want to bring a little personal slant onto it, because I was working for the church at the time, and I had been working there for 6 years, and there was an issue which I won't go into because it's irrelevant. But I went to him and I spoke to him about it, because I was leaving the church at the time. And he sat down and penned a letter to me, Siki, which he got in his car, and he came and hand-delivered it to me at the church. In his own hand, I still have that letter, just reassuring me and comforting me. And that is the essence of the man that he was. He was deeply caring, and sometimes had a kind of an aloofness about him, because it was difficult for him to communicate on a personal level at times. But in fact, he was a deeply caring, his heart was made of butter. He was an extraordinary leader, an amazing example to Catholics, and I'm just deeply grateful that I got to know him in the way that I did. And I want to thank Paddy and his team for what they're doing in honor of Archbishop Hurley, because they couldn't be doing it for a greater person. I believe he should be made a saint in the church.
Thanks, Rose, and thanks for reminding us. I think, Dr. Kanye, let's talk a bit about what she's talked about, the difficulties that he had with his white parishioners at the time, and leading a church that had, obviously, there were colored people, there were Indian people, there were black people, there were white parishioners, but you had a government that was constantly brainwashing people. How do you navigate that and still deliver the word of God to them in the way that you want to?
I think it was very painful for him to face that kind of opposition. I'd like to give one example, particularly in the matter of conscientious objection, when he said that the church should adopt as a policy conscientious objection to the war that South Africa was waging on its borders. Many people wrote really foul letters to him. I've heard that his the mail coming in was just full of recriminations and criticisms. And he said to some people that he wishes that some people would understand how much pain he felt for the young white soldiers on the border, facing the difficulties they were facing, and having been brainwashed into being there. And he felt that people really didn't understand what he was feeling and what he was thinking. But overwhelmingly, of course, he had to see that the war was an unjust war. And so he did advise people that if in conscience they felt that they should not fight for the South African government, then they should do that, they should object, and they would have his full support. And he appeared in court for a couple of conscientious objectors, particularly one young Anglican, Charles Yates, and Archbishop Hurley had kind of decided to go for 1 or 2 days to the court hearing, but in the end stayed on to hear the verdict and to comfort Charles when he was sentenced to go to prison for a year or more, and that was very, very meaningful for Charles.
And Bishop Philip, let's just talk a bit about that, because for conscientious objection to going into the border war, it was important, Archbishop Hurley's emphasis on the role of the church here, rather than just the role of the individual.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, whilst the Archbishop and others like him objected to the illegal war being fought against our neighbours, yet, as Paddy indicated, he had a great heart for those soldiers who fought in the army, many of whom I think just were brainwashed, as we heard, and it was a very important role of the church, because at the same time the church, through people like Archbishop Hurley, were taking a stand for the truth and saying that as a nation and as a church we should not be involved in anything that was going to destroy, divide and break up, which is why he came under so much attack. The fact that he was accused of being a communist. Well, that's a compliment. I was banned under the Suppression of Communism Act, and I've always thought that they did me a great favor by doing that. So we shouldn't worry too much about that. But it just shows you the kind of people at the time. Yeah. Which is why we miss him so sharply. Right. And we wish he were around.
I'm going to ask you to pause there for a moment, Bishop. We're going to continue after the news at 10 and chat to a few more people and then wrap up our conversation. Let's go to Utsile Sako and get the news at 10.
SAFM, South Africa's news and information leader.
Thanks, Siki. Making headlines, Thabo Mbeki not attending a lecture in his honor, and Syria urged to improve access for foreign aid workers. Good morning. Former President Thabo Mbeki will not be attending today's ANC centenary lecture in his honor. Mbeki said to be busy with his mediation efforts between Sudan and South Sudan. A spokesperson, Mokoni Rasitanga, says 4 Mbeki family members will, however, be attending the lecture. President Jacob Zuma will deliver a lecture on Mbeki's leadership legacy in Aliwal North in the Eastern Cape. This is part of the ANC centenary celebrations. Every month is dedicated to a former president of the party. Rasitanga explains.
He will not be attending the lecture. He's working on matters related to the 2 republics of Sudan. There are 4 members of the Mbeki family who will nonetheless be attending the lecture today.
Meanwhile, Mbeki has been awarded the 2012 African of the Year award for his mediation efforts between Sudan and South Sudan. The award is given by the Daily Trust. Its past recipients include former soccer administrator Danny Odan, former Niger Chief Justice Salifu Fatima Bezeye, and Pan-Africanist Dr. Tajuddin Abdul Rahim of Nigeria. Senior reporter Mahlatsi Gallens reports.
The award is given to ordinary and exemplary Africans who have made an outstanding contribution. This year, the Daily Trust Advisory Board decided to give it to Mbeki for helping bring Sudan and South Sudan back from the brink of war. The board honored him for outstanding leadership. As chair of the African Union High-Level Implementation Panel on Sudan, Mbeki has been leading the mediation over disputed territories, oil, and helping forge new relations between the warring neighbors. Mahlatsi Gallens, SABC News, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Police have released the names of 2 people shot dead in their home in Harrismith in the Eastern Free State last night. They are 60-year-old Willem Brits, a priest in the NG Kerk in Kerkenburg at Harrismith, a 25-year-old Gerardus Vermeulen, his daughter's fiancé. Brits' wife, a 59-year-old Dorothea, sustained severe head wounds and is being treated in hospital. Brits later died in hospital of head injuries. 1 suspect has been arrested. Police found 5 cell phones and a revolver in his possession. The Marikana Commission of Inquiry has heard that the Northwest Provincial Police Commissioner, Zukisa Mbombo, expressed dissatisfaction with AMCU's attitude in persuading its members to surrender their weapons. Colonel Duncan Scott has told the inquiry that AMCU President Joseph Matunja failed to persuade its workers to surrender their weapons on the morning of the massacre and on August 16. Scott is giving evidence on the steps police had taken on the day. According to Scott, Mbombo put it to Matunja that it was important for him to talk to the workers urgently.
Mr. Mathunya did not show up at 9 o'clock for his promised meeting with the group at Kopi 1. The Provincial Commissioner, Lieutenant General Mbombo, phoned Mr. Matunja concerning his failure to address the protesters. She inquired as to why he had gone back on his word. She reminded him of his importance, of his commitment, and how critical it was that he convinced the protesters to lay down their arms. Mr. Mathunya responded to the General that he had been at the Lonman mine offices from early that morning and that the mine management did not want to commit to continued negotiations, and that General Mbombo continued with him, saying that she was concerned about his commitment to find a peaceful resolution and that he had to honour his commitment to convince the group to disarm.
Animal rights activists have converged in their numbers at the Campton Park Magistrates Court on Gauteng's East Rand. This is where rhino horn smuggler Chimlong Limtong Tai is expected to be sentenced after pleading guilty to a range of charges. These include obtaining hunting permits illegally that led to the illegal exportation of 26 rhino horns, but he pleaded not guilty to the more serious trading charges. Edwin Ntsidi is in court.
Animal rights activists from various organizations have come out in their numbers to hear the fate of Limtong Tai. Limtong Tai is the most senior figure in the rhino horn smuggling ring ever to be convicted in South Africa. On Wednesday, the state requested the court to pass a stiff sentence to the accused because of the gravity of the crime. Terry Price for the accused prayed with the court to impose a hefty fine and show mercy to the accused. Edwin Ntsidi, SABC News at the Campton Park Magistrate Court on Gauteng's East Rand.
And finally, further afield, the United Nations aid agencies will urge Syria to improve access for foreign aid workers at a meeting in the Swiss city of Geneva today. The UN estimates that fighting between the Syrian government and opposition forces has left more than 2 million people in need of help. The UN Regional Humanitarian Coordinator for Syria, Radiwane Nusia, has described the situation as serious.
I would say there is no institution on earth that can really meet all the needs of the Syrian civilian population at this stage. It comes to food or water or education or health. All basic sectors have been affected and people continue to suffer in misery.
Recapping the top story, former President Thabo Mbeki will not be attending today's ANC centenary lecture in his honor. Headlines at 10:30 with Asanda Matsaunyane.
Morning Talk with Siki Mgabadeli.
And it's 7 minutes past 10 here on SAFM 104 to 107, paying tribute this morning to the late Archbishop Denis Hurley, talking about his influence, his faith, his legacy, and his life and times. And as you've heard from a number of our callers, our SMSs, and of course my guests, he really, really did have major impact in many people's lives here in South Africa and around the world. Here's a Facebook message from Denzel Matham, who says, "Good morning, Siki. I grew up at the St. Teresa's Orphanage. Denis Hurley did a few masses at our church in the 80s. He was so humble. I received communion from him. He had a bond with the nuns in Sydenham, Durban, and the nuns took us to see the late Pope at the Durban Old Airport. What an experience. Great man, and God bless him." Thanks, Denzel, for your message. Another messages come through, other SMSs that have come through on 34701. Someone says, who is it? It's Mpopetsi in Kronstadt, who says, "As a former YCW member in Kronstadt under the late Father Taule in the mid-60s, we were blessed to have him as a guest speaker in 1966. What an iconic figure indeed." And Nelly Swa says, "My education was paid for by the SACC until I passed matric. This was assistance given to freedom fighters. Thank you very much." And another one says, "We must also remember Sister Aidan, an Irish Catholic nun who graduated as a doctor from Wits in 1945 and was killed on the 9th of November in 1952 in the present Duncan village in East London. She saved many lives in the Eastern Cape. God love her." And here's a tweet from Swelihle, who says, "Siki, that's my bishop with you in there, and he once financed our trip to Pietermaritzburg Cathedral for a youth conference and the Anglican Church Stateville." So Bishop Philip, there's a tribute to you from Swelihle this morning. Let's hear from Professor Ati Nxumalo, who knew the Archbishop for a very, very long time. Professor, morning.
Morning, Siki.
How are you?
I'm fine, thanks, and congratulations on your program.
Thank you. Thank you. What would you like to share with us?
And I would like to say how lucky we were to have Archbishop Hurley as our priest, and also as a person who empowered especially those who had no power, who were especially those who as a first language did not speak English. He is the person who motivated everyone, and there were people who thought that was not possible because many of the African people did not speak English then. And he said he was going to institute a translations system, and I was one of the translators, simultaneous translation. And I really adore him for acknowledging that there is a lot of wisdom in African traditional societies. So he respected indigenous knowledge, he respected cultural pluralism, he did not look down upon people who were not like him, and what he taught us was that you did not have to hate or dislike people who had differing views.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Professor Nxumalo. Let's hear from Denise Cox, who was also a great admirer of the late Archbishop. A morning to you.
Good morning to you.
What would you like to share?
Well, I can't add to the vital aspects that have been mentioned this morning. I'm overwhelmed by them again, although I know most of them. My little story is just to illustrate how deeply caring he was, how sincere in tiny things. and above all, his ability to influence someone who's totally different from him. Here's my story. Unfortunately, I have to take you back to the 30s and early 40s in South Africa, when Afrikaans-speaking youth in Pietermaritzburg were made to feel very inferior and unwanted. For example, the common confrontation from behind the shop counter was, when we spoke Afrikaans, "I don't speak that language. Go to your friends, the Indians, they do." Now, taking that into consideration, here's my story. On the very first evening of our debating league, the opening speaker on our side, Willem Scumbi, stood up and spoke in Afrikaans.
Yes.
But within a few seconds, the mayor of Pietermaritzburg lounged back in his chair in clear view of all of us and gruffly interrupted Willem, objecting out aloud in the typically anti-Afrikaans attitude, saying, "I don't speak that language. Speak English. Get him to speak English." Willem froze, totally. Nothing that I did or said could bring him back to life. It was sheer agony. And then after a few seconds of utter silence that felt like hours, firmly and brooking no opposition to this issue, the chairman spoke out. "We will allow the young gentleman to continue in his own language. He has every right to speak it wherever and whenever he chooses to. So will everybody please relax, and will the young gentleman please start all over again?" Now, you've guessed already. The presiding chairman for the evening was the City Parliament's member for Howick, Father Denis Hurley. Now, to me, and this is the point that I want to make, is his kindness was so profound, so extraordinary, because nobody had ever taken our side in public before. And here he was, English-speaking, and of the Roman Catholic Church, the Roomse Gevaar, and you know we were indisputably anti-Roman Catholic, here he was speaking up for us. I can tell you that ever after, whenever he spoke out concerning policies of the national government or what, I told everybody around me to heed what he was saying, because I knew that he could be trusted. And in that way, he really, indisputably, influenced my life, my politics, well, my whole life.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And that story, Dr. Carney, beautifully told in the book Truth to Power. And it's interesting that both callers, Professor Nxumalo and Denise, talk about how he protected other languages.
Yes, indeed. And he was a person who, of course, who was something of a linguist himself.
Yeah.
When he was studying in Rome, he learned to speak French and Italian and Latin. Those were the three languages used in the training of priests. And he missed out, unfortunately, in the best opportunity he would have had to learn to speak isiZulu fluently, because he was needed at the cathedral in Durban, so he wasn't sent out to a mission station. But that was something that he regretted for the rest of his life.
I'm going to take one more call, and then we're going to wrap up our conversation with just, I think, some final messages on what we can learn from the life and times of the late Archbishop. Let's hear from Father Smangaliso Mkatra. Good morning.
Good morning, Siki. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. And you?
Thanks for the opportunity. For 18 years, I worked for the Southern Catholic Bishops' Conference. And during that time, when Archbishop Hurley was the president, I served under him as Secretary General. And during that time, I had also an opportunity to engage with him to ensure that issues of justice and peace and reconciliation were really put right in the forefront. As a leader, he was a man who could listen. He was very empathetic, inspirational, a man of courage who did not shirk away from engaging in constructive confrontation if it became necessary. Very sophisticated sense of humor. So he wasn't just a very serious-minded intellectual or a fighter for justice and so on. And one or two things that were probably which I remember very clearly, is that when we're busy in the process of writing the Kairos document, which he and, of course, lots of other people did not sign for reasons that they explained to us very carefully. But we could sit down with him and engage theologically so that he understood exactly where you came from, where you're going, and why. And he really, in many instances, exercised the role of advisor, the role of almost, one could say, comrade, properly understood and so on. And I think Guardian of Light, that book has a lot of information which can tell us more about him. Finally, let me just point out that it's all very well to speak wonderful things about this great man of God, but those of us, especially I'm appealing now to those who are Catholics, who have got the means, and some of us are billionaires, they are millionaires, they are trillionaires, or whatever, that they make a small contribution to ensure that we contribute to the building of the Archbishop Hurley Center in KZN, that we also promote the work that the SACBC is presently doing to continue the work of Archbishop Hurley through the Institute for Justice and Peace. And last week, I was about to speak to Vavi Zwelinzima, reminding him of the role that the SACBC played, in fact, even right up to the formation of COSATU.
Yes.
When it was launched in 1985, I even remember a message from Archbishop Hurley to COSATU.
Yeah.
So one can say a lot of things, but I just thought it's good to highlight some of those very important contributions that he made.
And thanks for doing that, Father Mkhatshwa. Thanks for your time this morning. Let me get final word from my guests as we wrap up this conversation. Dr. Mkhize, I'm going to start with you, and I think the appeal from Father Mkhatshwa for support, for financial support, particularly for the center, is a good one.
Yeah. Actually, as a trustee, I'm glad somebody just spoke just before I wrapped up and appeared. And I would like to say I am actually feeling very lucky and very honored that I've been part of this interview, so I've learned a lot. But also I'm one of the trustees of the center. And I think it is nice to know as an ex-student, ex-activist that we've lived during the time and the influence of people like Archbishop Hurley and other eminent South Africans, Archbishop Dudu. And I think they really helped us and they pushed in fighting against social injustices. And I just want to say, all of us must remember this history and keep it as our rich history. Because for me, this will help us in moving forward in terms of rebuilding our very beautiful country. But it needs the commitment.
Yes.
And that commitment goes down to saying, what I have, I will share with other people. And this kind of thing, like the Denis Hurley Center, it's just an example of what we need to be doing all around the country in terms of honoring people that actually led us and showed us the way to lead us to where we are today. And the humility for me is just another plus. So I'd like to say thank you very much, Phoebe, and I'm glad I've shared this stage with people like Perikani and Bishop Rubin there. And these are the people that I have seen as a student activist, and I can see they are still carrying on where the art left off. And I would like to urge all of them and all of us who were activists to say, let us revert back and continue to do what we need to do for our country.
For our country.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mkhize. Bishop Philip, your final word?
Well, I must say, first of all, Archbishop Hurley loves sport, especially rugby and cricket. And without sounding too disrespectful, I'm sure he has a ringside seat in heaven watching the South Africa-Australia game that's being currently played.
Yes.
He would enjoy that very much. Now, I simply wanted to say ditto to Dr. Mkhize and the support for the Denis Hurley Center. But most importantly, I think, is to say it's good that we're paying tribute to this great man, this great son of the African soil. However, if we believe in the things that he stood for and the things that made such a difference, then it becomes incumbent upon us as South Africans to continue that work of transformation. The church must not withdraw, and it is in danger of doing that, I'm sorry to say, but it has to engage our society in a new, fresh and vibrant way, so that we can be what we all wish we would be. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Connie?
Thank you, Siki. I wonder if I could just give a brief commercial so that people know how they can get the book Denis Hurley, Truth to Power. Is that okay?
Yes, that's absolutely fine.
First of all, it's published by UKZN Press, and I'm very grateful to them for doing that. It's a beautiful book. It's on sale at most exclusive bookstores and can be purchased on internet through Exclusive. It's also available at Adams Bookshop in Durban, Protea Books in Pretoria, Fogarty's in Port Elizabeth, Clark's Bookshop in Cape Town, also the Book Lounge there, and the Catholic Bookshop in Cape Town. And if all else fails, phone me on 072 806 4417 if you really want to have a copy. All the royalties from the sale of this book go to the Denis Hurley Centre.
So it's for a good cause.
Very good cause.
Thank you very much to all of you for your time this morning, and thanks for sharing your memories of Archbishop Hurley.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure. 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 It's an absolute pleasure.